Well, it's broke. Alright, I've got this Space Invaders here. Space Invaders Deluxe. It's in pretty rough shape. I got this in a big bulk deal. And it's seen better days. And I've been messing with it for a while, and pretty sure I figured out the problem. I've come to the conclusion it's broke. That's what's wrong with it. It's broke. Monitor board laying down in the bottom. Lots of leaves and stuff. The cabinets, I got to do something with the bottom of it. The cabinets, I don't know what's going on down there, but I'll figure it out. But I'm hoping it'll clean up and we'll be able to piece it back together. So I'm going to take everything out of the bottom of it, vacuum it out, and then I'm going to see if I can get new feet and stuff on the bottom of it, try to get it up a little bit so it's level, figure out what's going on with it. It had a little extra on the bottom, so I just cut the extra stuff off, and now we're going to put new feet on the bottom. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. I know. Alright, Dave. I heard you. It'll be alright. See? I told you it'd be fine. Look. Looks brand new. Nice and solid, see? It's good. Like brand new. Well, I got my first cleaning done. Looks pretty good, really. But I gotta figure out something with this monitor, so I'm gonna mess with that next. Well, I changed some caps while I had it out. There was a couple broken wires that I found. One was the ground, and one of the yoke wires up there had snapped in half, so I soldered it back together. Both the fuses on the front were blown. Swap those out. Now I have neck glow. Alright, now watch the screen as I unplug it. See it collapse? So I think I got a working monitor, surprisingly. I don't know why they probably broke those wires taking that monitor out of there. I don't know. I guess they started parting it out. But yeah, these black and white monitors can be kind of tough sometimes, for me anyway. Alright, I'm going to plug it again. Well, let me turn off the lights. Neck glow. Ready? Monitor's working. So now I just need a power supply and a working game board. Monitor might have some issues later on, but this is pretty much as far as we can go without a working board, really. Alright, I put in a new switching power supply. I know what you're thinking. Well, Joe, why didn't you rebuild the original one? Well, we could have done that. But you got to think you got to remember, I'm selling this to somebody, and this may be their only game. And if they call me up 5 years from now, I can't just say, well, get out your soldering iron, change your 2N3055 transistor, make sure you change that flux capacitor. This way, if something goes wrong and it's power supply related, I can just mail him one of those power supplies. And if he's got a Phillips screwdriver, maybe it'll work. But anyway, we've had pretty good luck with putting switchers in a Space Invaders. We wouldn't do this to a Centipede or something like that with an AR2, but this has worked good for us. Alright, so I've got one Space Invaders Deluxe board on the shelf, and it's in pretty bad shape. But I'm going to plug it in and see what happens. Alright, I got my board in there. Power supply is doing its thing. Got everything hooked up. Let's see what the monitor's doing. So, we obviously got some problems. But I got something that nobody else has. It's a great troubleshooting gadget. And you're not even going to believe it. It's very expensive. It's the latest and greatest of technology that nobody else has. You're not even going to believe it. Let me go get it. I'll just put that in there. Shut the door. Alright, well, it's about time for me to go. See you guys later.
Alright folks, Joey said that he needed me to work on this Space Invaders Deluxe and that he left me a note about what was wrong with it. Let's see here. That... Oh, come on. Joey! This got to stop! Seems very broke. It's no bueno. Alright folks, so here's the deal. I have went through it and we did a video here on our channel where we talk about how to fix the RAM errors on these boards. Okay, and so you can use this test ROM, Space Invaders test ROM. Look at this. Now if you want one of these for your very own, the place you want to go is hobbyroms.com. Our buddy Steph runs hobbyroms.com. Anytime we need a ROM burnt that we can't do here, we order it from him. So if you don't have a ROM burner, you might want to order one of these from him. So all you got to do is just email him. He'll make you one. Okay. But what this does is, it's a little program somebody created. It's available for free on the internet. You take this ROM out, which is ROM number H. That would be letter H. ROM letter H. Okay. Now if you look, the reason that all of ours is acting crazy is because the program's not running. But you see the H there? So that's number H. Now, I'm just going to tell you all the information I know, and we can go from there. Okay? That is H, G, F, E, and D. If this were just a regular Space Invaders, you would only have 4 EPROMs installed. Now notice how there's extra sockets. That's because this Midway 8080 board set, they call it that because the CPU chip is a 8080. Okay. The Midway 8080 board set ran all kinds of games. So it ran 280 Zap, it ran Seawolf, I believe, yeah, Seawolf, It ran Space Invaders. It ran Space Invaders Deluxe. It ran Boot Hill. It ran, I think there was one called Gunfight. It ran Midway's Tornado Baseball. There were about 20 games that ran on this same motherboard. And so they made it where it's expandable. So some of the games might use 8 ROMs. Some of the games, like Space Invaders, would just use 4 ROMs. Space Invaders Deluxe uses 5 ROMs. You'd think that would be kind of strange to use a weird number like that, but we'll talk about that more here in a minute. So this board set is capable of running a bunch of different games. Now, look at our soundboard here. Look at, like, for instance, that. This thing isn't in the greatest shape. The motherboard's in pretty good shape. The soundboard, not quite as well. Okay, so this is a Deluxe Cocktail 2 Space Upright 2 daughter board. Deluxe Space Invader motherboard. This is just how they did things. Look, people, I didn't invent it. This is just how it was done in the late 70s. Now, if you look, there are a bunch of chips changed. That's because, in reality, I've been working on it a while. So the way that you fix it, and we're going to work on it some more. I just wanted to tell you what we've done, and then we'll move on to the next part. The way you do this is you take out EEPROM H, you install your test ROM, and then when you boot the game up, this program, the CPU boots up, the crystal's over there, everything boots up and it starts reading code. Well, the code is contained in this test ROM. The test ROM tells the board to check the RAM, and it runs a little RAM test procedure. Okay, so this is RAM A, B, C, D, E, F, G, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, it will come up on the screen and show you which RAM is bad. So when I did it, it told me this one was bad, I replaced it. It told me that one was bad, I replaced it. It told me that one was bad, I replaced it, and then it booted up. So when it booted up, it starts running through all of the sounds that the board can create. So on Space Invaders and Space Invaders Deluxe, the daughter boards are very similar, which will be important here in a minute. On Space Invaders and Space Invaders Deluxe, they only have a few sounds that they can make. That's just how things were done back then. So there is a sound that the UFO makes when it comes on the screen, and it goes something like right, as it's going across the screen. So it can make that one sound, and then it can make the missile sound. So when you shoot at something, it goes psh, 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 right? Then it can make an explosion sound, they call it, and that is when you get hit. So when you get hit, it goes because you blew up. Okay? Now when you shoot one of the invaders, it goes blink, blink. Right? It can make that sound. When you get an extra man, it goes just like that. Okay, it can make that sound. When you shoot the UFO, it goes glue, 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 glue. And finally, there is the famous thumping sound. So it can go thump, 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 which is actually 4 sounds. Thump, 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 thump. Right? So that this test ROM tests all of that stuff, and it shows you each sound. And so you can see if your sounds work, okay? So if your sound does not work, if you look in the schematics, there is a specific area of this board that does each one of the sounds. So this area down here is a little noise generator. So you need it to make the explosion sound whenever you get hit and it goes. That's one of these op amps using the noise signal to make this explosion noise, right? The missile sound also uses that noise signal. It just runs it through different resistors and capacitors and all of this stuff, and it makes it sound a little different. So instead of it goes as you shoot, right? And it's just how they've designed the thing. This is all analog sound. So they have used little resistors, right? Some capacitors. I've been chasing sound problems with it, so I've replaced all kinds of crap. Diodes. And it just depends on how they run the signal, what they run it through, and you know, it loops back over on itself and all this. And so if you run that noise sound through this resistor, and this cap, and then this op amp, and then back through itself, and then through it one more time, you get. But if you run it through this resistor, and then a cap, and then into an op amp, and then out of that into two more resistors, and then to a cap, and then into the op amp again, it goes. That's just how it works. It's just the way the thing was designed. So if you get sound problems, you can figure it out by looking in the manual and seeing, okay, well, it says in the manual that the Invader hit sound uses this chip. I don't remember which one's which, but uses this chip. So it could be that chip's bad or blah 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 blah. These are LM3900 op amps. Known for going bad. So on a Space Invaders Deluxe, most people will go through and just replace each one of them. So that's what we've done. A couple of them are already, but we went through and replaced all of the op amps. I then resoldered a bunch of the things, replaced a bunch of the old tantalum capacitors, and it got the thing where all of the sounds work. Okay? So all of the sounds work, and all of the RAM work. So now we're up to what we're actually going to do here on video, because it's going to be very interesting. If you want to see more about the sound or the RAM, we have separate videos here on YouTube for both of those. So we've already done all of that. That's why I'm not showing you everything right now. I've got to watch, you know, I have to make it where hopefully it's interesting if you've seen the other videos. And I know you'll watch any of them. So our problem is these chips are 9316. See the 9316 PROMs. These can be burned one time, and then if you get any kind of problem in there where the code is messed up, you can't fix it. They can't be reburned because they can't be erased. So what happens is, these are very old. I mean, this is from like 1979 or whatever, you know. These are really old. Sorry to all you 43-year-olds out there. So when I put the PROMs back in, the board will not boot because we've got one of these PROMs is bad, or maybe a couple of them are bad, right? So you have a couple options there. You can replace all of the PROMs with 2716 EPROMs. And you change some strapping over here. I've actually already done it. That's why it was acting so weird. You change some of these signals over here we're going to talk about here in a few minutes, and it makes it where these sockets can carry 2716 EPROMs. But the problem is, it's kind of getting hard to get 2716 EPROMs. They're really old, you know? So I need 5 of them. I don't think I've got 5 of them. We use them all the time. We use them on pinball machines and stuff, but they're a very small EPROM. They're, you know, the same size as this. And we're just to the point where it's getting harder to get that stuff. They stopped using 2716 EPROMs in about 1984 or something. You know, so I mean, we're trying to find 40-year-old parts. So here's what we're going to attempt to do. We're going to attempt to put a multi-game on this. We're going to make our own old school multi-game like they used to do back in the day. I haven't seen one on a Space Invaders, although I'm sure there's plenty of them, but I've seen them on Pac-Man boards all the time. What they'll do is, you'll get a board in, and it'll have some kind of EPROM kind of hacked into it or something, and there'll be a bunch of jumper wires and stuff, and there'll be a switch, and the switch will say something like Pac-Man, and then on the other side it'll say Fast Pac-Man. I've seen some that said Pac-Man, Fast Pac-Man, Miss Pac-Man, Fast Miss Pac-Man, and it'd have 2 switches. So we're going to talk about how to do that and what's going on. So what I'm going to attempt to do is put Space Invaders Deluxe ROMs on it and Space Invaders ROMs on it. And then if you turn a switch, it plays Space Invaders Deluxe. You turn the switch the other way, it plays Space Invaders. And some people would probably value that. They'd probably think that's kind of cool that you can play both games, although they're very similar. Space Invaders Deluxe, in my opinion, it's a superior game. There's a little more going on, but you know, some people would disagree, and some people would like the option to play both. So how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to do it, you can do it on anything, and I'm not an expert on this, but we're going to limp through it together here and see if I can figure it out. Basically, you see how it has the room to put different amounts of chips, okay? Well, the way all of that works is there is in that first ROM, now this is our little test one, basically there is instructions. The code is basically telling the board how to operate, and it's using the RAM, and it's using the CPU, and a lot of these support chips and stuff to do what it do, baby, right? So it basically, you can build a code that's basically also exercising the soundboard. So that's what they've done. They've created a small code here that tests the RAM, and then if all of the RAM passes, it goes into a switch test. I think it's got a switch test and a sound test, and that's the code that they've written. Some smart person wrote that. Thank you, whoever wrote it, by the way. But on the original code, what you've got is, let me see if I can find the one. Yeah, H. So for whatever reason, it starts at H. It's backwards, but the original one, it starts at that code, and that code says, okay, we're a game called Space Invaders Deluxe. There is this much memory, and so in this particular game, there's 5 ROMs. Here's where everything's arranged, do this, do that, blah, 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 and it starts running everything. So whenever it needs more memory, it's basically the program that's running. And this is all very simplified. All you people that understand this better than me are going to cringe at this, but oh well. I'm talking to the people like me that want to learn, right? So basically the code, the beginning of the code, what starts everything, you know, like the BIOS you would call it, I guess, of the system, kind of sets the parameters. How much memory is installed, where things are arranged in the memory, what it's supposed to be doing, what program that's running, draw this display, look for an image in this ROM at this location, blah, 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 right? If you didn't have Space Invaders Deluxe, this chip would be slightly different. The one for Space Invaders that goes in the first spot would say that there's only 4 ROMs. And it would do things slightly differently. The gameplay's a little different, blah, blah, blah. If it was Tornado Baseball, I don't know how many it uses, but the first part of the memory, the first thing that's accessed, would basically say there's a certain amount of memory, things are arranged a certain way, and here's what here's what we want to do. So it's all, this ROM is the software that's telling the CPU and the other things that it has access to, the RAM and everything, how to make the game work, right? So here's what we're going to do. Let me get a piece of paper. I'll show you what we're going to do. All right, so again, this is very layman's terms. This is not the technical way to do it. This is just me trying to explain it, okay? These are the types of chips that are in there. The size of chip that's in there. So only so much information can store on this chip. I would tell you the 2K, the 4K, whatever, but I get it confused, so I'm not going to tell you. But a 2716 is twice as big as a 2708. And the way the memory map works on it is it's like you have areas of the chip. So I'll just guess at this. I might get it backwards, but we'll see. So 27, let me go look and see well, I'll get it confused if I do that. Basically, this chip can contain a certain amount of memory, right? And so for the CPU to access it and the RAM to access it or whatever, it has to know where on the chip the information is stored, right? And the way that it does this is through these address lines. So see A10 there. That's the highest address line on this 2716. If A10 is high, which would be 5 volts, then it's telling this chip to look in the top half of the chip, right? And then depending on where A7, A6, A5, A4, A3, A2, A1, A8, and A9 are, it's telling it, okay, well, now that you're looking in the top half of the chip, look in the left half of the chip. Okay, now that you're looking in the left half of the top half of the chip, look in the bottom half of the left half of the top half of the chip. Okay, now that you're looking in the bottom of the left half of the top half of the chip, look in the bottom of that part of the chip. You know what I mean? So depending on whether these lines are on or off, the RAM is accessing one little spot in the chip. So it's looking for it right here because of how all these are, right? Now if A10 instead of being high was low, it would look in that exact same spot, but down here on this part of the chip, because the top address line is the other way, right? So I believe if it's low, it's the bottom half, and if it's high, it's the top half. And by the way, it's not physically, it's just the in order, right? So like I said, I'm simplifying it, okay? So look what we've got here. So this is a 2716. They also make 2732s. So you know what the difference between a 2716 and a 2732 is? A 2732 has an A11. Yeah, that's right. It has an A11. So it works just like a 2716, but then guess what happens? A11 goes high. And so if A11 goes high, you know what happens? Instead of looking here in this chip, bam, it kicks it in the next gear, and now you're looking way up here in the next half of the chip, because the 2732 is twice as big as the 2716. Now they look identical. That's a 2732, and that's a 9316. Right? This chip has twice the capacity of that chip. They look exactly the same though. So where did they put the A11? Well, they reconfigured something where they could squeeze A11 in there, right? They needed one more line. Okay? And then they came up with the idea, hey, let's make a 2764. Well, guess what a 2764 is? It's twice the size of a 2732. Can you believe this? Can you believe this? So when they did that, they said, you know what? We need a little more room. Let me find one here for you. We need a little more room. So they added 4 more pins. Now, why would they add 4 more pins? It's because they need an A12. They need an A12 to get to the other half of the chip. Right? So if with the 2716 you can run it with A10, you need an A11 to run a chip twice that size so that it can turn on the other half of the chip, or turn that off and turn back on the other half of the chip, right? And so to make a 2764, not only do you also need the A11, you need an A12, really, because you got to turn on another half of the chip. And on it goes. And you can see how it grows, you know, kind of exponentially. So here's what we're going to do. So think about it. We have a 2716 and we have 5 EPROMs. Okay. So if I were to stack a 2716 and another 2716, you could put both of those chips inside of a 2732. If I were to stack all, like on Space Invaders, if I were to stack all 4 of the 2716s, you could put all 4 of the Space Invaders ROMs in a 2764 because it's 4 times the size. So you could add the 4 ROMs together and then burn them in one chip. Now you'd have to do a couple little things like control when the chip is selected, right? Because there's a whole circuit that selects which chip has which part in it, right? But you could do it. Okay. Well, guess what? I've got 5 chips, so they won't fit in the 2764. I'm a little bit too big. But you know what they would fit in? They would fit in the next chip up, which is a 27128. So if I had a 27128, I could put 8 2716s in it. You could put 2 2716s in a 32. You can put 4 in a 64. You can actually put 8 in a 27128. And you know how they made that happen? they added a line called A13. I'm trying to simplify this for you. So if A13's on, you're looking in the extra half of the 27128 that 2764 ain't got. But 2764 has an A12. And the reason they have an A12 is so that you can look in the extra half of the 2764 that 2732 ain't got. And 2732 is twice as big as the 2716, but it also has an A11 to turn on the half of the chip that a 2716 ain't got. Now 2716 has an A10. The A10 is to turn on the half of the chip that the 2708 ain't got, right? And it just goes on and on. You get the point. I'm trying to make it as simple as possible. Well, here's my problem. I don't have any 27128s. Kind of a weird chip. I don't see those a lot. I don't know why. But what I do have is a 27256. Now, this is kind of overkill because you can put 16 2716s in a 27256. It's huge. It's humongous. It's way too big. Now, do you know how they made a 27256 work after they made the 27128 and added the A13? They added an A14. So the A14 turns on the half of the chip that a 27128 doesn't have. Okay? Think about this for a minute. Let's say that we started spitballing here. If I was to put in this chip, it's huge, right? Let's say I was to put something crazy. Let's say I rewired all these sockets. Couldn't I put this 2716 and like this one that I need, the H, couldn't I just burn it on a much bigger chip and then make sure that all the lines line up how they should, run jumpers and stuff, and use this big old chip instead of this small chip? Yeah, you could. So you could replace a 2716 with a 27256, and just the 1/16 of the chip would be full. You'd be using one little sliver of it, and that would be your data, right? But it would work. You'd have all this empty space, but it would work if you had everything wired right, okay? And then for the other chip that I need, F, I could do it the same thing. I could burn that little tiny file on a chip 16 times the size, right? And then, you know, you'd be wasting all kinds of space. But wouldn't it be it'd be better and more efficient if I burned all 5 of these on one chip? And I would use 5/16 of the chip. That's not the scale, right? So I would have all 5 of my files on 5/16 of the chip, just a little part of the chip, right? So I'd still have all this empty space up here. Well, what if I was to take all of the Space Invaders Deluxe info and put it on the bottom of the chip, and then take all of the Space Invaders info, the other 4 ROMs for Space Invaders that run on the same board, right, and put them in the top half of the chip, like that, right? And then put a switch on that top line, A14. And if that sucker is low, so I've got the switch set on ground, A14 is grounded, that means you can't access the top half of the chip. So when the CPU boots up and starts looking, it's going to look at that part of the chip. And it's going to play Space Invaders Deluxe. And then if I were to switch my switch to 5 volts, well, now when the CPU starts looking for code, it's going to look in the top half of the chip. So if the switch is one way, it's going to play Space Invaders Deluxe ROMs. If the switch is the other way, it's going to play Space Invaders ROMs. Ain't that cool? That's awesome. So that's what we want to try to do. Now, of course, I didn't come up with that. I'm just now catching on, right? People came up with this a long time ago. But that's how the early hacks evolved, stuff like that. And now, if you went to school for this, you would have thought of this, you know, day one, right? But that's what we're going to attempt to do. So since I have to use a 27256 because that's all I have, and I've got all this extra space, I'm going to try to put both sets of ROMs on it and just see what happens. So the first step is I've got to take these 5 ROMs and somehow get them into a file that will fit on half of this chip. Now, depending on your programmer, you can do this a million different ways. You can figure out exactly where the second half of the chip starts. I'm not going to do that. Here's what I'm going to do. Since the program is telling it, hey, my program is this deep, it doesn't really matter if your program is this deep, because it's never going to look up here. It's just going to look where the program tells it to look, right? So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ROMs. Notice there are room for 8. I'm going to combine the ROMs, and you do it in this order, by the way. H, F, E, H, F, no, H, G, F, E, D. I'm just going to make up 3 ROMs for there. Now, why would I go through all that trouble? Because I'm trying to make a file that is exactly half of my EEPROM, right? And then, for the next 4 blocks of my EEPROM, I'm going to use Space Invaders. So we'll just number them instead. So I'm going to do Space Invaders Deluxe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then I'll probably just do 5, 5, 5. Just put some extra stuff in there, right? Just because of the way my programmer works. And then I'm going to do Space Invaders 1, 2, 3, 4. And then I'll probably just do Space Invaders 1, 2, 3, 4 again, right? So basically I'm trying to make my 16 EEPROMs all stacked on top of each other in the right order. So there's Space Invaders Deluxe. If I were to put the Space Invader ones right after that, they would start in the EEPROM too early. The information would start right here instead of up here where we want it. Now, if you've got, depending on your programmer, you can tell it to burn this file to this part of the chip, and then burn this file to this part of the chip, and this file to this part of the chip. So you can do it different ways. It just depends on how your programmer works. I've got one that's fairly automated. You just hit a button and it burns the file. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to construct a file with everything in the right spot, and then burn that one big file onto the chip. So I'll show you how I do that. All right, folks, so the easiest way to do this, and there's 100 ways to do it, is you can actually open up a command prompt in Windows. So I have this on my computer. I have the ROMs all downloaded into a directory. The ROMs for these older games are available. You can find them. The whole purpose of MAME is not so you can play old arcade games for free. The purpose of MAME, originally at least, was to preserve the arcade games. So in MAME, the ROM files that they have are exact copies of the original ROMs from the game. So they're the exact copies of Space Invaders Deluxe and Space Invaders are available. So here are the files. I've named them ID for Invaders Deluxe. D, E, F, G, and H. Now the reason I named them something easy like that is because you have to type all this out, right? So there is an old school DOS command, copy, slash, I think the B means binary, I think, IDH, that's our first one, plus IDG, plus F, plus E, plus D. So that's our 5 ROMs that we want there. Now what I've done is I've added another D, and another D. Now the reason I did that again was just to make it our proper 16 kilobyte file size so that it fits in a 1/2 of that chip. That would basically fill up a 27128. So you type all that out, and then you type whatever you want it to be called. ID 128, Invaders Deluxe 128. Hit enter. One file copied. Easy peasy. So it did H, G, F, E, D, 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 D. Okay, so now I'm going to do the same thing with Space Invaders, the regular Space Invaders. All right, so I have done the same thing with Invaders H, G, F, and E, and called it Invaders 764. Okay, and then I added our 128 Invaders Deluxe, and then on top of it I put Invaders 764, and then since I had four more blocks to take up, I put another Invaders 764. and I called the whole thing Invaders multi.256. So that is our file that we need. And so you can see here, there are the original 5 files that are 2K, and combined they all made one that's 16K because of the way I stacked it. And then there are the other 4 original files that were 2K, and they made 8K the way I stacked it. And then I stacked the 16K and 2 of the 8Ks and came up with this one, which is in fact 32K. So it's a 32 kilobyte file. Now it says 256 file. That's just the extension that I named it. You can name it whatever you want. So it's a 32 kilobyte file to go on the 27256. And that should have everything in the right order. All right, folks. So we burned it. Programming successful. Doesn't mean it was. It just, that's what they say. Okay. All right, folks, so there is our chip, and I have put it in a socket. Okay, now if you look at this little chart I made, here's the interesting part. When they made the chip bigger, about the time they made the 2764, the way they did it was they added 4 more legs on the top. So if you look at the left side, A7 all the way down to A0, Q0, 1, 2, and VSS, which is the ground, all line up except for the 2 extra pins that are on the top. And then again over here, Q3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, which are all your data lines, all line up. So a lot of it is exactly the same if you don't count the top 4 pins. Okay. So I went through and highlighted the stuff that's different. These are just enable pins. So this enables the chip, but on the old one that actually enabled programming. Right? So what we're going to do is, on the old one, they used this G line to enable the chip. Well, it has that on the new one as well, but it also uses this. So we're just going to tie that low so that it's always enabled. Okay. And then we have, on this chip, pin 21 was the programming voltage. And so it wanted 12.5 volts, right? Well, they added that as one of the new pins up on this chip, and the one that was the programming voltage on this chip is now address 11. That this chip did not have, right? And then up here, pin 26, on the original one, it was the power. VCC is the power, right? So it's where it wanted its 5 volts. But on the new chip, it wants 5 volts way up here at 28. And the pin that we're going to have at this location wants address 13. Address 14 is the one that we're going to switch back and forth for the multi-game. And then we've added address 12 over here. We have this VPP pin, which is the programming voltage, but we're not ever going to program the ROM while it's in the board, so you don't really need that. So you can tie that low too. For it to program it wants 12.5, right? Well, we're not going to give it 12.5. We're going to give it ground. You could even tie it to 5 and it would be fine. You could probably just leave it all, not even connected, and it'd be fine. But you shouldn't really leave stuff floating. But we might anyway, okay? So all that to say, we're going to plug this into one of the sockets in such a way that all of the pins line up except for the 4 new ones, right? We're going to have them hang off the end. And I'm going to take the couple that we need to change, 1, 2, 3, and bend them up out of the socket. Now I may be able to get cute with it, and this pin 21 here, which is 23 on this chip, it's because there's 2 extra pins, right? So it's what here was 1 is now going to be 3. What here was 2 is now going to be 4. So they're all 2 off. So this pin I may actually be able to reroute using the straps on the board. So let me look at that and figure out what all of those straps do, and then we'll go from there. You can also put it in any of the sockets since we're changing this addressing, you can put it in any of the sockets. We're going to have to get some jumpers right here, and so I'll probably put it in this socket. I kind of like the idea too. We may be able to put the test ROM back in here. Maybe, I don't know. That might not work, but that probably won't work. But so anyway, I'm just going to mount it here, I think, because I can get to these address lines here. But we're working through it. Let me see which of these this enable, if there's a way to tie it to ground easily. And let me see if this pin 21, if I can change that from the programming voltage, which it doesn't need, to address 11. Okay, so I was just holding the chip on there backwards. Pin 1 is actually right there. You can tell by the little notch, right? So if you count around the pin 21, all of the pin 21s are that programming voltage we were talking about. Okay, now that's if it's a 2716. If it's the 9316Bs, it's different. But anyway, they have made that where you can change it on the board. So those all go back to this spot right there that they call S2, I believe. But it's that little spot right there that I have the pin in right now. This spot. Okay. When you see pictures of these jumpers, you always see them upside down. It's because of the way the board's made. I can't really show it to you from that side. This is the side you're going to be working from. So this is pin 21, which we now want to be A11. A11 is this line right here, and it's also that one that I've circled. But it's easier to make the jumper from here to here than it is from here to here, because you might hit this one, which is going to be something that we'll find out here in a minute. Right? So I've made a little jumper, and that has tied A11 to pin 21. So we have fixed one of our problems without having to hack anything, just with a jumper. Okay? So let me see if this pin 18 can be grounded. I would like that to just be attached to ground somehow. Which would make the chip always enabled. So that's what we're looking at next. Okay, so pin 18 of the socket, which is pin 20 of the new socket, I grounded. That's going to always enable this chip. Okay, and then pin 24 of the original chip was 5 volt. I have bent the pin out of the socket, right? And I have attached pin 28 of the new socket to 5 volt by just attaching it to the pin just below it. See how there's an extra there's a place for 2 new pins on each one. Well, that's attached to 5 on the back. So I've just extended it down. So pin 28 on the new chip is attached to 5 volt. There's a million ways to do this, by the way, people. I'm just doing it my way. So I've handled those two. One by just changing the strapping on the board. One by bending the new pin out and then grounding it. This pin here, all different chips, since that's the enable pin, were attached to some of the circuitry up here. So what that's going to do, if you leave that connected, it's going to turn it on and then move over to this ROM and whatever that the original code, which is now actually in here somewhere, is telling it to do. So we can't have that. So we're just going to ground it where it's always enabled. Okay. So we've got that one, and now we've got the power done, right? Okay, so that leaves us, I think we got 2 left, I think, because I'm not going to worry about the programming one. So, unless, if that pin 1 is above a ground, it's not. Okay, so next up, it's unfortunate that that cap is right in the way. Next up, I need to connect pin 26 to A13. So let me see where I can grab A13. I believe it's one of these. All right, so here's what I got. I only had to do 4 jumpers. I've jumpered pin 18 to ground so that the chip is always enabled. Okay, pin 21, and this is of the socket, not of the chip. Pin 21 was programming voltage, but it needs to be A11. I made that jumper over here. However, A11 is this jumper right here. So you could have run a line from there to a bent out pin 21 on the bottom socket, but I would prefer to do the jumper on the board so I don't have all these freaking wires everywhere. Okay, so then we had the problem where pin 24 of the socket was the 5 volts, the power for it, and we need to make it A13. So I bent out the pin and attached it to here. We'll talk about that in a minute, this jumper. Okay, and then so that basically fixed the 3 that are messed up on the original chip, right? Okay, grounded this one, attached this one to A11 with the jumper over on S1, okay, and then made this one A13 by running a jumper wire, okay. Okay, and so I then needed pin 28 to be 5 volts so the chip's powered. I was able to do that by just connecting the pin straight down into the board because that pin there is 5 volt on all of these. Another way to do this, you might consider just taking like this socket out, because this socket will never be used. I'm trying not to like screw up too much stuff so that somebody could put it back the way it was originally, right? But you could take this socket off that's never used and it's got the pins already down there. But you can't just directly connect them because like these 3 are all connected to 5 volts. So it wouldn't really work for a 256. But anyway, so that's where we're at, okay? So then I have connected, well, I showed you that one. Over here, pin 2 is just hanging out because it's hanging over the end of the socket. Pin 2 is supposed to be A12. Okay, A12, whoa, is this middle jumper. Okay, A11 is this jumper, but we didn't use it because we were able to use this jumper. So it kept us 1 wire off the top of the board. Now here's the tricky part. Remember I said I'm going to put a switch on the A14 to, if it's grounded, it's using the bottom half of the chip. If it's 5, it's using the top half of the chip. So A13, you would think that you hook up to A13. But get this, the way this is configured with the 5 ROMs, the 8080 doesn't use A13. A13 is that line right there. It's got it hooked to A14. So it is doing its selection, its chip select with A0 through A10, you know, the address lines, and then it's using A11, A12, and A14 to do chip selects. Let me show you in the schematics so you can see what I'm talking about. But you see it's hooked up to A14. I've confirmed that. So that's 11, 12, 14. 13 is never hooked up. So here is the 74LS42 at E2, and these are the jumpers that we were just looking at. Now it's hard to read this. It says 9, 10, 11, 12, 14. And then this one can be set to 10, 11, 12, 14, 15. And this one can be set to 11, 12, 14, 15. There's a 13 in that area. You saw it runs above it, but they never use that. So it's actually using address line 14 to select it. I don't know. Doesn't, whatever. Okay, and so that this 74LS42 decoder chip, you can see these lines here run down and enable each one of the ROMs. So that's how they did the chip select See the CS, right? That's how they did the chip select on the unmodified board, and they just use these straps to change things. I guess that depends on what size ROMs you have in the board, right? So they never use 8013. So my whole point is we're hooking up 8014 to 8013 of the big chip. Who in the world knows if this is going to work? But I think it will. Well, we've been working on it for a while, but we have got it. It did work. So whenever you do that, hook up A13 to A14 on the board, and then hook your switch up to A14 on the chip. So that is it running Space Invaders. I'm going to show you. Okay, so here is the switch we've mounted in the little thing. And as you can see, the original board is in there. We are, I put the back door on, so it's running the original board. It's on Space Invaders, okay? And let me show you what happens when you switch it. It kind of glitches out. And now it is swapped over to Space Invaders Deluxe. Let's see if we can go back. Basically, there's a watchdog that if the code is messed up for about 4 seconds, within 4 seconds, something like that, it resets. So you're basically glitching out the code, and then it turns it back the other way. Glitchy, glitchy. Glitchy, glitchy. Did I crash it? There we go. So you're basically playing with a ROM hack. You know, you've got it reading one set of ROMs and then you crash it into the other set of ROMs. It'd probably be better if you turned it off and then did it, but you can do it on the fly. So let me set up the tripod. We'll play both versions and see if they seem to be legit. So you are looking at it in the straight up old school Midway cabinet. You can see the Pepper's Ghost effect, I think they call that. Is that what they call it? So you are looking at a mirror and you're seeing a reflection of the monitor, which is actually down, mounted flat, as you saw whenever we were working on it. So you're seeing the image on the monitor reflected off this mirror to where you can see it out the front. The mirror is a two-way mirror, and behind it there's artwork. There's a light bulb back there that is illuminating the artwork, and there is a piece of plastic in front of the light bulb. On the monitor, there is a gel overlay that is colored green, yellow, orange, red. And so it basically it gives it the effect of being color, but it's a black and white monitor. So it's one of the most beautiful games ever, and it was one of the first ones. So right now it's playing Space Invaders. Let's see if I can coin it up, and we'll try it out. Now, keep in mind, it's the original code. The missile sound is slightly different on Space Invaders Deluxe. And then when I was messing around with it to fix the sounds, I changed some of the capacitors. I put a slightly different value in for one of the capacitors. So the missile sound it's a little not exactly how it's supposed to be, but it sounds close enough for me. It's close enough to perfect for me, like Alabama said. Like Nate said. See how the guy blocked me? And again, he wants to fight. So usually Space Invaders doesn't have the color overlay. Missed him. We'll get that sucker next time. He'll be back. And I know you can count the shots and all that. I have no interest in doing that. Missed him. Man, did you see the shape this thing was in when we started? Got you, sucker. Boom, 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 boom. I can't ever do the one where you leave that bottom guy. I can't ever. I'm never good enough to do that. Uh-oh. It's hard. It's hard when you get killed when there's only one left, because that sucker is flying when you come back. All right, so we have heard all of the sounds that it can make. That was the extra man sound that it just made. Missed. My timing's off a little bit. Nice try, sucker. See how they're lower now? So this is board 3. You can also see they're more aggressive. They're like shooting more. See how I'm clearing off one side first? If you do that, it takes them longer to get to you, because they have to walk all the way across the screen. Ooh. Basically, you don't want to be to the left of the... Missed him. You don't want to be caught over here. You want to be in the middle. Okay, so I got 2,840 points. So that is Space Invaders. Let's do our little flip, if I can reach it. You're right in the way, people. I might have to move you back just slightly. You'll be all right. Okay, the thing where the Y is upside down, that is actually how it's supposed to be. It's like a little joke that they play. Basically, the invader comes out and fixes it. So there's the attract mode for Space Invaders Deluxe. I'm gonna go ahead and coin it up, because this video is getting very long. So now it will play Space Invaders Deluxe on the same board. By the way, you can't do this with a Space Invaders soundboard. It has to be a Deluxe soundboard because Deluxe has a couple things on the soundboard that it needs. So you'll see that they improved the graphics. Yeah, improved the graphics. Basically, it looks exactly the same, but there's extra graphics. And this, they make a noise as they come down that they didn't do on Space Invaders. See the one on the shields too, letting you know what level you're on. If this were run on, the missile sound is slightly different on Space Invaders Deluxe. It's slightly different on my version too because I've changed the caps. That's another thing. Getting rid of rows on entire columns allows you more room to shoot the UFO when it comes by. And so they try to escape. It says SOS, SOS. And now you've got different invaders. You'll see some of these guys, when I shoot them, they break in half. Or I believe that's on this level. Yeah, see that? They're getting aggressive. That UFO blinks. I think if you shoot it when it's disappeared, it doesn't hit it. Because I seem to miss that one a lot, and I can't tell if I just miss slightly or if it... See, it's not blinking now. I'm going to get you, sucker. Oh, they clipped me. So I like being in the middle. Got you, sucker. SOS, SOS. Sometimes they do different things as they're escaping. Sometimes they break down, they run out of gas. Ooh. I don't know that I can beat the third level. Okay, I'm not going to hunt the UFO. I'm just going to try to survive. Oh. Oh, they got me. All right, 3,340 points. That's the best I could do. So there you go, folks. That is Midway's Space Invaders Deluxe with a little, what do they call it? Poor man's multi-game hacked into it. Flip a switch, and it plays Space Invaders. Hope you enjoyed it. Leave your comments down below. Make sure to give us a thumbs up for taking the trouble to film it for you. We didn't have to do that. Think all the extra time that it took to film all this for you. We didn't have to do any of that. So I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to hack your own stuff, that'll teach you just the most basic of hacks. That's probably the easiest possible hack to do on anything. All of you people that do that went to school for any of that, I'll just call it. That's how I like referring to it. Did you go to school for that? We'll recognize that as like the easiest possible way to change any kind of hardware or software. But it's kind of fun to play around with. So I hope you enjoyed it. Leave your comments down below. Hey, don't forget to check out my brother Donnie. If you don't know about him, he has a channel on here as well. Joey and I do arcade games and pinball machines, jukeboxes. My brother Donnie does old buildings, vehicles, and he has a farm. So that's pretty cool. So make sure to check him out, and we will see you on the next video. I hope you enjoyed it. Space Invaders.